Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, we bring you the story of a mob murder gone wrong and the devastating consequences for one family.
This shooter went right up to this vehicle and shot multiple times.
At this point, I cannot say definitively who the target is, but we definitely do not believe Mila was the target.
It was a brazen daytime drive-by shooting.
The car pulled down this street and just went past the house to the neighbor's house. Didn't take long for the shooter to get out of his car, run right up to the driveway and just start shooting.
It's a violent end to Musitano's life, which has a storied criminal past.
Hamilton's a big city, but it's not a big city when you have 3 different mafia families rubbing elbows together and trying to vie for power.
Peter Chung from York said, "Do you guys have a black Honda that was involved in your murder?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "So do we."
Once police were able to connect the 2 cases together by the surveillance and the cars, they were able to uncover tracker information.
Murders don't go away until people are brought to justice.
Here now is Karen Lieberman with Sorry I Wasn't There.
It was March break, but we were out, and when we came home, it was about 7, it was a rainy day, and there was a police car at the front, and I said to my husband, "What did you do?" Like as a joke. The detectives were waiting for us, and they came to the door with Mila's picture. I didn't want to let them in. I said, "You got to tell me first," and then all hell broke loose.
It was March 14th, 2017, 1 week since the Barberi family of Vaughan, north of Toronto, celebrated their daughter Mila's 28th birthday.
Yeah, I recall that day. I can just picture it. It's always there in my head. You know, like a bad dream.
Police are investigating a double shooting in Vaughan.
At about 4:30, that's when I got a phone call about a homicide that took place in Vaughan in the parking lot outside a commercial premise.
What we do know is that a woman in her 20s and a man in his 40s were both shot. The woman had the more serious injuries. She was rushed to hospital with no vital signs.
She was shot multiple times, so the cause of death is as a result of gunshots to her body. And the male victim, he was shot in the arm.
The investigators are looking at every possible avenue and are looking to speak with anyone who knows the individuals that were involved or anyone who can provide any information that may help.
Right now, the circumstances surrounding the shooting are still being investigated, and police have stayed quiet on them right now, but we are hoping to learn more details about what did happen here.
What did we know about why the victim had arrived at this location?
She was there to pick up her boyfriend who was getting off work. And as a matter of fact, he and his brother owned the business at that location. So the people working there knows who she is, and then with that, we were able to identify who she is and broke the news to her family about what happened.
The victims were 28-year-old Mila Barberi and her boyfriend Saverio Serrano.
The shootings you can see from these pictures took place in an industrial area with a number of surveillance cameras, and police are trying to get that footage from those cameras.
They have cameras capturing all the activities in the parking lot, and also we were able to gather a security camera from other business, so it kind of helped us to piece all the events together.
Cameras captured everything, including the arrival of a Honda Civic and a Jeep Cherokee.
This is pre-homicide. You're going to see the Honda Civic and the Jeep. They're just traveling in tandem. He's going to park his car on a side street off this main road. After he parked, he will get out and then walk toward the Jeep Cherokee. He will get into the passenger seat. After that, you're going to see the Jeep turn around and then start heading toward the murder scene. Mila's already waiting in the parking lot in her BMW, and we just saw the gunman's car driving past and pulled into the parking lot next door. Here you have the boyfriend leaving the business, They were going to go see Mila. Mila's getting out because she loves the dog. That's why he brought the dog out. And then they were just kind of hanging outside along the driver's side. The gunman came out, walked up to the passenger side of the BMW, fired a couple shots, then came around and then went to the driver's side and then started shooting. He came back, jumped over the bush, getting into the front passenger seat, and then they fled.
What do we know at this stage about the shooter?
From the video, you can see it's a big man. We cannot tell what kind of ethnicity that person is because he's wearing a mask and he's wearing a jacket and gloves.
That this shooter went right up to this vehicle and shot multiple times. You know, what did that tell you about the nature of this incident?
The shooter or the people responsible for this incident know when that car was supposed to be there. The car is going to show up around that time. We believe they were targeted.
As investigators try to piece together who did this and why, neighboring police forces respond to a number of unusual incidents.
Around that time, we do have a lot of firebombing, shooting in the Greater Toronto area.
There's other shootings and murders that are happening in Toronto that are connected to traditional organized crime as well.
One in particular captures attention some 70 kilometers away in Hamilton, Ontario, and makes headlines right across the country.
It was a brazen daytime drive-by shooting that left 39-year-old Angelo Musitano gunned down right in front of his watered-down home.
She said 6 gunshots, and then she went over with another neighbor, and they were going to try CPR, but it was bullet holes in the window, so they didn't, and then the police came.
It was May 2nd, 2017, that the Hamilton police received a call of a shooting in Waterdown. I remember I was in court actually in another homicide trial, and I heard about it, and I went back to the office and learned of who the victim was.
What did the name Angelo Musitano mean to you?
Pat Musitano, of course, was considered the boss of the Musitano crime family. His younger brother was Angelo. They both went away to prison for a time.
It's a violent end to Musitano's life, which has a storied criminal past. He was born into a notorious mafia crime family, and in the 90s, Musitano and his brother Pat were charged with first-degree murder in the contract killing of mob boss Johnny Papalia. In the end, they reached a plea deal to a lesser charge in the contract killing of Papalia's right-hand man, Carmen Barrilero, killed by the same hitman. Musitano served 10 years in prison and was released in 2007.
Do you believe that this was a targeted shooting?
Absolutely.
It all comes as a shock to residents who say Musitano appeared to be a friendly guy, a family man with a wife and kids. But those familiar with his criminal past say his death is no surprise at all.
We are learning more about her, including her identity and her name. Police have released that name, 28-year-old Mila Barberi, who just celebrated her birthday a week ago, only a week ago. She was shot here in this industrial plaza outside of an electric supply store yesterday afternoon in broad daylight. And police say she was with someone who is known to her, a 40-year-old man who was also shot, but will survive. He is expected to be okay. There are a lot of shops here, a lot of businesses that have surveillance cameras here, so police are hoping to get their hands on that, and they hope that this will help them get to the bottom of just who is responsible for this young woman's murder.
How critical was the surveillance video in understanding what happened here?
Well, for one, the video will let us determine that the gunman originally targeting whoever was supposed to be sitting in the front passenger seat. After shooting twice on the passenger side, I suspect that he realized nobody's in the car. So he come back out and then went up to the driver's side, and then that's where Mila and the boyfriend were situated, and then he fired multiple shots at them.
Cameras also captured what happened next.
This is post-homicide, so we have the driver and the gunman. They're in the same car. We're going to see them getting out of the car, the shooter getting out first, and then he'll be walking toward where the black Honda Civic was parked. You see he just kind of looked back.
The driver continues on, parking the Jeep some distance away.
And then very soon you're going to see him walk toward the parked Honda Civic, and he got into the passenger seat and they both left. Through our video canvas from the scene, we were able to locate the suspect vehicle on a street in the industrial area in Toronto. It's not too far from where this murder happened. We find that the suspect tried to burn the vehicle, the inside, but then they were not successful. So we were able to collect some evidence. Through our investigation, we learned that that vehicle was stolen before the murder. There was also a license plate attached to the vehicle, which was also stolen. At this point, I cannot say definitively who the target is, but we definitely do not believe Mila was the target.
She was my firstborn. I was there at the hospital when she was born. Beautiful girl. Very loving, very caring. I always hated it, but when we went to, for example, to a shopping mall, had to put those bracelets so I can keep hold of her, but she would run to people to say hi and, you know, climb to their arms. The restaurant's the same thing. Very independent. She taught herself how to ride a bike. You know, outgoing, animal lover, nature lover.
She would always take off with Midas. She was always out with Midas, like in the neighborhood. But, and there's this lake north of here that she would go often. And she would sneak into the private areas and have her own little place. You know, she would take her cousins and, you know, they'd bring their rafts and their coolers and they would just sit there for hours. And Midas would go swimming, you know.
Midas was Mila's golden retriever, the dog she'd always wanted.
And I kept saying, never, 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 not in this house, nope, you know. And one day she found someone that was a student that couldn't handle it anymore. And then, you know, the guy brings him up, he comes up the stairs, he's so cute, this little puppy, and I was dying inside. I'm like, oh my God, he's so cute, right? And I didn't say anything, and then, you know, we spent some time with him. I'm like, okay, girls, it's not gonna happen, okay? Like, he's cute, but I think I'm allergic to dogs. So should I go get tested? And you know how allergies change, right? So I'm like, they didn't find I was allergic. So she was shaking, she was so happy, like shaking.
Mila had been working at her dream job as a veterinary technician.
Tough job because she cares so much, but she assisted in a couple of operations in one of the vet clinics she worked at. She was very excited about that. She loved it.
You were proud of her?
Very much so, yes.
Adding to their grief, Mila's parents had been concerned about the man she'd been dating, Saverio Serrano.
You know, many times, you know, I'd go to bed with this thing here, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is not right, this is not right, this is not right. And I remember saying to my husband that it was 2 days before, I says, we have to go talk to him. It's too late, you know, and it was too late. Probably nothing would have happened anyway. Mila was very determined, very, you know, she did what she wanted to do.
Finding it hard to believe anyone would want Mila dead, police turned their attention to her boyfriend. His father, Diego, while not named as a mafia member, was described by police as a facilitator when he was arrested years earlier.
Diego Serrano is notorious for being a drug importer. He kind of was like a pseudo free agent, very well connected. And he had a number of different cocaine convictions. The key with the mafia is corruption. Once you corrupt somebody in a key place, whether it's police, a judge, a lawyer, somebody working at an airport, it allows that door to facilitate the criminal proceeds to come into the country. And that's what Serrano was really good at, Diego.
Saverio Serrano himself had no criminal record, wasn't known to police other than the association for his family. Him and his brother owned the lighting store where the shooting took place.
She knew exactly, she knew the history. I should have brought her home and protected her. Doesn't matter, she was 28, she was still my child, right?
The only thing I can say to Mila is, sorry I wasn't there to take the bullets for you. I would have been without thinking. You know, you had all your life ahead of you. Mine is I'm almost at the sunset of my life, so I would have taken the bullets for you. No problem. I'm sorry. I wasn't there.
Welcome back. As police explore their theory that Mila Barberi's death was connected to organized crime, a major mob member is taken out. We now return to Karen Lieberman and Sorry, I Wasn't There.
Angelo Musitano lived in a quiet town halfway between Toronto and Buffalo, New York.
A nice, as they call bedroom community, nice suburb of Hamilton. A couple of schools really close by, soccer fields, baseball parks, just a nice place to raise your family. It happened at approximately between 3 and 4 p.m. This time of day, kids were just getting home from school. The car pulled down this street, just went past the house to the neighbor's house. Didn't take long for the shooter to get out of his car, run right up to the driveway and just start shooting.
Just so brazen.
Yeah. People in the neighborhood heard the shots. Angelo's wife was in the house, she heard the shots, and everybody came out, and by then the shooter was gone, and people started calling 911. Everybody heard something. We did have a few people who said, you know, they gave a description of this car driving away, but actually somebody witnessing the actual shooting, it only took seconds.
Angelo Musitano's murder isn't the least surprising murder. The only one I would have expected before that was Pat Musitano. I mean, these guys have had a target on their backs since 1997.
That was the year Johnny Papalia was assassinated. The Musitano brothers were charged with, but not convicted of, that hit.
You can't just kill somebody like Johnny Pops Papalia without permission. You need a powerful backing, typically from another crime family. Investigators literally observed members of the Rizzuto crime family from Montreal and members of now the Todaro crime family from Buffalo meeting with Pat and some of his henchmen in Niagara Falls, in Hamilton, Ontario.
During his time in law enforcement, Stephen Metelsky worked on one of the largest mob investigations by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It led to arrests involving money laundering, illegal gaming and drug trafficking, and revealed criminal activity spanning North America. He points to Hamilton as a major hub for mob activity in Canada, along with Toronto and Montreal.
And when you look at Hamilton, 1996 was the peak of the Clavering Mafia in Hamilton. You had the Papalia, it's referred to that in some circles, Johnny Papalia or Papalia. You had the Musitano crime family, and you had the Violi Lapino crime family. Hamilton's a big city, but it's not a big city when you have 3 different mafia families rubbing elbows together and trying to vie for power.
The Musitano brothers were born into this underworld.
Their father, Dominic, was a mafiosi. Their uncle, Anthony, was a mafiosi. Their relatives from Italy immigrated to Canada and settled in Hamilton. It's a generational thing. And when you look at Pat and Angelo, like Dominic, their father died in 1995 of a heart attack. And now all of a sudden, they were literally propelled into the driver's seat of controlling the Musitano crime family.
After Vito Rizzuto's death, long considered to be one of the country's most powerful mobsters, the Musitanos found themselves without valuable protection.
When he was alive, nobody touched the Musitano brothers because they knew they had the backing of the Rizzutos. I call it this trajectory of foreshadowing of violent events. 2 years later, in 2015, Pat's SUV was torched in the driveway of his St. Clair Boulevard home. In 2017, Angelo was shot in the driveway of his Waterdown home.
So it was a number of factors that ended up leading to a target on Musitano's back.
They literally signed their death warrant the day they killed Papalia. People don't forget, and revenge is a dish best served cold in the mafia.
So, Marianne, the big question, of course, is who did this? Do they have any leads at all as to who was behind this?
Yeah, that's really the focus of the investigation now, catching the person who did this. But at this point, they've only released a very vague description of the suspect, and that is a man with a stocky build wearing dark clothes and driving a dark vehicle with 4 doors.
You could tell right away that this was planned. This was well orchestrated. The shooter arrived before Angela had arrived home, covered head to toe. So we knew right away. Again, we thought, this was going to be a professional hit, and it looked that way from the video.
What did you know about this shooter and who you were looking for?
All we knew was that he was very large, stocky male. We didn't know his race at the time. So at the outset, that's all we had, was just this physical build.
Neighborhood canvassing and attempts to obtain the license plate from the surveillance video came up empty, but then a lucky break.
We found the vehicle. It was located several days later, abandoned, in that Waterdown Flamborough neighborhood. So it wasn't burned out or damaged, so we seized it right away, and we took it directly to the Center of Forensic Science to have it examined there. The license plates obviously were stolen, didn't belong on that car. They weren't reported stolen, which was interesting. So when we went to the owner's residence, and they lived in Hamilton, we said, these plates, you haven't reported them stolen, but they belong to you. And they looked at us weird, and they said, well, my car's right there. So we looked at their car, and there was a different set of license plates on their car. They had no clue. Unbeknownst to them, they were driving around with a pair of license plates that didn't belong on their car. Those license plates, however, had been reported stolen just down the street from where that person lived. You're stealing plates, putting them on another car, taking those plates so they don't get reported stolen, so you could put them on your Ford Fusion to use in the shooting. We started seeing how much planning went into this.
Musitano's autopsy revealed further evidence of that planning.
When the autopsy is completed, the forensic officers are there, and they seize all the clothing, they seize all the personal belongings. And one of our forensic investigators, very switched on, went through all of his belongings. And what he found was a piece of paper, and it had written in pen a type of vehicle and a license plate. And it turned out to be very significant. It turned out to be a vehicle later on down the road that we found out was being driven by our suspects, and they were using it to conduct surveillance on Angela Musitano.
A search of his pickup truck would reveal it had a tracking device underneath.
We learned that it was purchased out of a store in Toronto.
What's more, police also discovered that the Ford Fusion had been spotted in the neighborhood days before the murder.
A witness who contacted the police because they were concerned. They saw these vehicles parking at the side of their house, and they thought some drug dealing was going on. And that's how we got on to who they actually were versus just having a stolen plate we don't know who it belongs to. Now, because this person actually noted that car, noted the vehicles coming and going from that car, jotting the license plates down of all these vehicles associated to that car, it came back to the actual people who own those cars, and then we were on to people.
The 2006 Ford Fusion used by the killer has now been directly linked to a 2006 to 2011 two-door black Honda Civic. A single male was seen operating the Ford Fusion and was observed arriving and leaving in this Honda Civic. And that's during the period leading up to the murder of Angela Musitano.
While you're investigating Musitano's murder, there's other shootings happening across the Greater Toronto area. Are you, having conversations with other police services?
Yes. There was several murders in Toronto and York that were connected to traditional organized crime as well, and we just kept an open mind as to are any of these connected. So we did meet with Toronto Homicide, we met with York Homicide.
In York, detectives were still working to find Mila Barberi's killer.
They were still going through video surveillance for their murder and gathering evidence and whatnot. It wasn't until we just happened to be talking, the lead investigator, Peter Chung from York, said, do you guys have a black Honda that was involved in your murder? And I said, yes. And he said, so do we.
Welcome back. As investigators follow leads on all the cars involved in the murders, they uncover an elaborate plan that got botched along the way. And now, some of the suspects are on the run. Here again is Karen Lieberman. Sorry, I wasn't there.
Hamilton has a very long history of mafia, but it had been very quiet in the 2000s for a long time. So I think a lot of people kind of naively thought that the mob was gone or maybe diminished. And then when Angelo Musitano was murdered in his driveway in Waterdown, broad daylight, it shocked everybody because neighbors didn't know who he was. They had no idea that that's who was living in their neighborhood.
Equally shocking was that his murder appeared connected to the death of Mila Barberi.
So this is the video surveillance footage from Angelo Musitano's home. The view you're seeing right now is the cameras above his garage. You can see how the car stops in behind that tree and just waits there. And it's arrived before Angelo Musitano has gotten home. So now we're back to above the garage, and this is Angelo Musitano arriving in his truck. You can see how it pulls in the driveway. Now we see the person getting out and running across the lawn, and this is the shooter. As he approaches the truck, he starts to shoot at Angelo, who's in the truck. And we can see how the shooter was dressed completely, covering his face, his hands, everything. So we had no idea what ethnicity this person was at the time, just that he was a stocky build, that he arrived in that car before Angelo arrived home. There was the video surveillance system where Mila was killed. The shooter had the same build, and again was completely covered head to toe, covering his face. And when we coupled the black Honda that was used, that's when we started to say those are similarities.
Police discover the Civic is registered to Jabril Abdallah, a 27-year-old man from Hamilton, picked up on unrelated charges.
Jabril was charged with a drug offense and a money-related offense, and unbeknownst to me at the time, he was being investigated for a homicide. The drug offense was withdrawn. I think he pled guilty to the proceeds of crime count and ultimately got a discharge. It was a minor-related disposition, but his cell phone remained with the police.
Jabril Abdallah at that point was our suspect.
As they investigated him, they followed leads on other cars involved, including the Ford Fusion.
Investigation revealed that this vehicle was stolen from Quebec about a month prior. The burgundy Ford Fusion had been seen conducting surveillance upon Angelo Musitano since at least April 27th, and a canvass resulted in the acquisition of thousands of hours of video footage. As a result, investigators identified 3 other vehicles that we believe were involved, and that more than one individual was involved in the planning of this murder. The driver of the burgundy Ford Fusion was observed alternating between that vehicle and a 2006 to 2011 two-door black Honda Civic during the period that Angelo Musitano was being followed. The burgundy Ford Fusion was also observed interacting with a blue or grey-coloured Infiniti sedan during the period Angelo Musitano was being stalked.
The Infiniti was the car Musitano had spotted and noted down. Right plate, wrong make.
Once police were able to connect the 2 cases together by the surveillance and the cars, they were able to uncover tracker information. So there were actually trackers that had been installed on victims' cars as part of the really sophisticated surveillance that was happening before the murders.
The day she was murdered, Mila had been driving Saverio's BMW. There was no tracker on it, but police believed that was a mistake. They theorized the suspects had been targeting Saverio's brother.
What was known is that his brother, Francesco, was known more to police, that his driver's license had been suspended. So he was borrowing his brother's car in the weeks before, and because he couldn't drive, he often sat on the passenger side. Somebody else would drive him. Is it possible that the shooter thought that Francesco was in the car? It's possible.
Possible because police found a tracker on a similar BMW with a similar plate number at a restaurant the Serranos were known to frequent. There was also the tracker on Musitano's white pickup.
We learned that it was purchased out of a store in Toronto. We went with search warrants, and so from there we were able to determine the tracking devices were purchased by people using their real name. It led us to a Michael Cudmore. And then we started doing a background on him and getting into his involvement, and he started appearing in intelligence reports with other traditional organized crime families. So it started to make sense to us.
Cudmore had been accompanied by another man, Daniel Tomassetti.
Investigators from both York and Hamilton now wish to release surveillance photo of a person of interest who they believe participated in the surveillance of Angelo Musitano and Mila Barberi. He's male, white, slim build, approximately 5'8" to 5'10", with short or shaved hair.
What police have said is that Tomassetti, although he wasn't known to police in terms of a criminal record, that he did have some criminal associates.
They also found his name in Jabril Abdullah's cell phone.
Nothing about planning a homicide, but I think it did show that Jabril was friends with Daniel Tomassetti, that he may have even been acquainted with Michael Cudmore through Mr. Tomassetti. It showed that he was pressured into putting a couple cars into his name, and there's this back and forth resistance between him and Mr. Tomassetti about him agreeing to do that. He initially didn't want to, didn't feel that he should oblige, and then ultimately did. And I think there is even some evidence to suggest that he was not just friends with them, but knew that they were involved in some criminality. What that was, no one really knows, but certainly from our perspective, it wasn't for the purposes of a murder.
Eventually, Abdullah had agreed to register the Civic and the Infiniti in his name. With 3 suspects in play, police got permission for wiretaps.
In an effort to stimulate the wires, they held a press conference about the vehicles, and they said they were looking to contact owners who owned a black Honda Civic between certain period of time. They said that they only had a partial license plate. This was a lie. They had the license plate. They knew that Jabril Abdullah had this vehicle registered in his name. They knew where this vehicle was parked. What they wanted to do was sort of spark them talking again.
We knew that Jabril was not the actual shooter in Angelo Musitano. He just didn't fit the build and the size from what you saw on the video camera, but we knew that he was involved in all the planning that went on to that murder. We met with him at a Tim Hortons. He came voluntarily. He didn't know, obviously, what this was all about. We knew what we wanted to talk about, and we knew what we knew at that point. He didn't. So we met with him and asked him about the car and asked him a few other questions, and after that he was just free to go. We told him he's not under arrest.
And then they sat back and they watched, and Jabril Abdullah and Daniel Tomassetti did meet. Soon after that, they don't know what was said.
Around that time, forensics came back on the Ford Fusion, moving Cudmore up the priority list.
Again, we took the vehicle to the Center of Forensic Science to be examined. They swabbed it for DNA, and his DNA came back inside that vehicle. So with it being a stolen car, I think he would have a hard time explaining why his DNA was in that car. He also did very much fit the build and stature of the shooter.
On the hunt for Cudmore, police notice one of the purchase trackers has activated. It leads them to the home of Sean Bixby, a known associate of Cudmore's. Behind his house, they find the blue Infiniti with Cudmore's belongings in it.
After the murders, Michael Cudmore, the shooter, fled to Mexico. While Daniel Tomassetti was under surveillance, he left his phone at home and used a different car and traveled to the airport. This was in January of 2018. He flew to Mexico, to Cancun, and he had a return flight booked, and he never got on that return flight. Jabril Abdullah stayed, and I don't think he would have had the means or connections to flee. He was not a known criminal. He didn't have, associates in other parts of the world like the other two did, and so he stayed.
Investigators arrested Jabril Abdullah of Hamilton on Wednesday and have put out warrants for the arrest of Michael Cudmore and Daniel Tomassetti, allegedly involved in the planning and murder of both victims, though not the masterminds.
So they identified Michael Cudmore, Jabril Abdullah, and Daniel Tomassetti as a group. Michael Cudmore was a very well-known violent criminal, repeat offender, somebody who rubbed shoulders with mobsters and bikers and did all their dirty work. He was the shooter in both of the cases. And then you had Daniel Tomassetti, who was the one who allegedly sort of coordinated the surveillance. That's what police have said. And he brought his buddy, Jabril Abdullah.
The 3 suspects here each face 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 of attempted murder, and 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder.
I also caution anyone from this moment forward that if they assist either Michael Cudmore or Daniel Tomassetti to escape or evade arrest, they too will be charged with accessory after the fact of murder.
Welcome back. As police hunt down those responsible for the murders of Mila Barberi and Angela Musitano, they send a clear and unmistakable message to the mob. We now return to Karen Lieberman and the conclusion of Sorry I Wasn't There.
When police arrested Jabril Abdallah, it was the last thing he expected.
Jabril from the jump was shocked, as I was, that he was in this predicament, surprised that he was entangled in all of this. He was charged with the murder of Angela Musitano, and he was charged with the murder of Mila Barberi and the attempted murder of Mr. Serrano. And underlying both sets of charges, he was charged with the conspiracy to commit these murders.
At trial, it was never proved that he was deeply involved.
So there was a ton of evidence, but that evidence, as it continued to mount, in my opinion, really did continue to vindicate Jabril. And it became rather clear to me that he was not either a part of it or participated in it or planned it. He didn't even know who these people were, had never been anywhere near them. So I think ultimately what it did show is that he was friends with the wrong people.
Specifically, Daniel Tomassetti.
The evidence didn't reveal all that much about their friendship other than they went to high school with each other. I don't even think that the evidence revealed that they were the closest of friends. During the course of the timeline associated with the murders, they were purportedly attempting to engage in a business venture together. They appeared to socialize with each other, after work. They certainly communicated with each other quite a bit by phone.
What we know is that Jabril Abdallah registered 2 vehicles in his name, and that 2 of those vehicles were used in the surveillance in his getaway cars in the murders, and that he also has admitted to driving the 2 to go get the trackers, but he, in court, has insisted that he didn't know what it was for, that he didn't know anything about who he was actually working for, or the plot for murders, and that essentially he was just motivated by money. In the end, Jabril Abdallah pleaded guilty to participating in a criminal organization, and the murder charges were dropped.
As Abdallah faced time in court, an international manhunt was on for Tomassetti and Cudmore, both of whom had fled to Mexico.
We had made a connection with his family who lived here, and one sibling told us that Michael had been calling him from Mexico and telling him he moved down there and he was living a good life. And even after Jabril's arrest and the warrants came out, we were making attempts to look for him down in Mexico.
Cudmore may have met with foul play, given investigators say he has not been heard from since around the same time one of his associates named Daniel Ranieri was found dead.
In March 2018, Daniel Ranieri's body was found in a ditch in the Cancun area. He had been bound and executed. Up until that time, Michael Cudmore had maintained regular contact with his family here in Canada. They are now concerned for his safety and well-being.
In June 2020, Cudmore turned up.
We received information that he was found dead in Mexico. He was just found in a vehicle. There was an autopsy completed down in Mexico. And then we had pathologists from the Center of Forensic Science conduct a second autopsy here in Toronto, and their conclusions was no cause of death, nothing they could see that caused his death, no gunshot wounds, no stab wounds, no head trauma or anything like that. I can't say that he was murdered for sure. I just know that he died. It could be suspicious circumstances. It's not being investigated as a murder in Mexico.
There's an old saying in the mafia, 3 people can keep a secret if 2 are dead. When you look at the modus operandi of the mafia setting up a hit, they are going to bring in low-level, street-level criminals, or they're going to bring in shooters from a different gang, from maybe even a different province. And they typically are going to be so far away and insulated from the actual people, the masterminds, the conspirators, because they don't want to be connected. So those shooters don't know sometimes who the actual people were who ordered the hit or orchestrated or organized it. When you look at Cudmore, he had the street credibility in terms of the history of violence he's been responsible for. They knew that he had the courage to do it, and he kind of fit the parameters of the perfect trigger man for these murders. And the one thing is they are expendable even if the hit is successful. The second part to this, which did not help the situation, was the fact that it was very disorganized and botched. But the fact that an innocent civilian, a bystander, Mila Barberi, was caught in the middle of this and lost her life, that just put a bigger target on Cudmore's head in the underworld.
The last man standing in all of this is Daniel Tomassetti.
Although he's not the shooter, we know that he's more involved than Jabril Abdallah. We know that he purchased the GPS devices. As a matter of fact, I believe that he was in the area when the shooting happened in Vaughan. So his involvement is a lot more. Unfortunately, I cannot disclose all the evidence that we have, but I can assure you that he is involved in the planning, in the scheming, and plotting the shooting that day.
We know he hasn't returned to Canada, at least, under his name. That's not to say he hasn't left Mexico, but we just don't know where he is. I don't get the impression that anything happened to Daniel. I think he is still on the run. I can only follow the evidence which says Daniel's out there. He's still alive. We've had sightings out west, actually, in this country. We had sightings down in some Caribbean islands. I would say anybody who has information, absolutely to call in, whether you think or not it's credible or valid, and don't ever think you're wasting the police time, because you're not.
The investigation of both these murders and continued pursuit of Tomassetti has taken massive effort.
York, our police service, also at the time, because it was involving traditional organized crime, the RCMP in Hamilton, Niagara, on the intelligence side, we had to get assistance from, Mexican authorities who actually have to go through the U.S. To do that, because they have the connections there. So we were dealing with Homeland Security sometimes, FBI sometimes. Again, it's traditional organized crime, but it's transnational.
They operate best in the shadows. And when all of a sudden there's all this light where people are asking questions, it makes their life very uncomfortable. And again, I think that was the shift. No longer was it just Hamilton who was looking after them, or York that was looking after it. It was all of us together. The game had changed. And if some would like to think it's because of Mila, if there's going to be a legacy in her death, then that should be it. That should be it.
It's very important for us as the investigators and for the Barberi family. This is something that is still ongoing for them and always will for the rest of their lives. Murders don't go away until people are brought to justice.
I told my family that sorry, I died that day and it's empty. Sorry, I usually am able to put things in compartments and put them away, and it's been tough. I miss her. I go through stages. Every once in a while my armor gets a crack.
At the Barberi family home, sunflowers grow in Mila's memory. They were her favorite.
She would always bring me sunflowers. Alessio plants in the garden. He has that's his thing. He just plants all the sunflowers. One year we had them like 6 feet tall. And she loved yellow, and it's just so bright. It's just who she was.
When you picture Mila in your mind, just describe her. Where is she? Where do you see her?
Well, if it's such a heaven, she's up there, surrounded by all the trees, with Midas, and the lakes, the waters, the flowers. Just, I hope she's at peace,
My last words to Midas, her dog, when we had to unfortunately put him down is, don't worry, you're going to go to sleep, wake up, Mila's going to be there. And if I'm having my doubts lately, but if there's a heaven and she's there looking after God's creatures,
I just hope she's at peace, but I would do anything to her.
In May 2023, Daniel Tomassetti was named one of the 25 most wanted in Canada by the BOLO program, which stands for Be on the Lookout. He is the last of the suspects being sought in these two cases. Hamilton Police Detective Jason Cattle hopes he will return to Canada to face the charges, insisting authorities will never stop looking for him. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.